Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm going to be doing a plaster, how to mix plaster, basic, small amount plaster, slow and steady, really detailed. This is a must watch video if you are taking a three-dimensional art class or if you're an amateur archaeologist. Okay, so a few things to note. On the sink behind me, you'll see, do not put plaster in the sink. Never wash your plaster vessels in the sink. Plaster hands or plaster hands, thank you, Chella, in the sink. It will clog up the sink and it is an old. So you'll notice maybe off camera, there's a couple of rinse buckets over here that we use. Okay, so I'm gonna get right to it. So this is gonna be my vessel. I'm gonna be mixing the plaster in. I'm gonna take a little cold water right here. Now, essentially, hopefully in this overhead camera that Chella's controlling a zoom on, and in this low camera and in this bird's eye camera, you can get a sense of how I'm doing this. So I'm essentially gonna fill it up about a quarter of the way, maybe a third of the way. So it's a little more, so I take some out. Basically, if you add too much water, if your ratio is too much water and you can't add enough plaster, it will never set up. You can always add a little bit of extra plaster, but you can't go the other way. If you have too much water, if it's too watery, it'll never ever set and cure. So if you notice on the bottom of this, and I'll make it so it's for the overhead camera that Chella is manning, it says islands. This is all about islands, okay? So over here, and I think you'll now see, this is a bag of a 50-pound bag of what's called Pottery Plaster. And essentially I take a little scoop of it up. I'm gonna just kind of double check. There are a few little chunks. This was the last bag of plaster we opened just before the pandemic. So it's not exactly the freshest bag. And I will tell you that I'm just discovering that there were a little bit of sloppiness on the last day of the project, which literally was at the very beginning of the pandemic. And now we are at the beginning of January, in the middle of January, 2021. And we have safety protocols of masks and face shields while we're working on these demos so close. You'll notice all these fans on behind me, around us, and doors and windows are wide open. I'm hoping that this can also function as a bit of a how do you continue to make studio art and art classes safely during a pandemic. So what I'm doing now is I've taken all the large chunks out, and I'm now going to use my fingers, and I'm hoping that there's shots that can do this, and I'm sifting it. And I'm just sifting it nice and slow, and I'll kind of move that. I'm just going to kind of sift it through, and I'm trying to cover the whole surface area. And I found a little chunk. Take that out. And so this is called Slaking Plaster. And you'll notice I'm not stirring at all. I'm just going to let that kind of settle in for a minute so you can kind of watch what happens as it absorbs. And I'm wondering if from the side view, it kind of looks all cloudy at this point. But if I come down low, I can see that it's still pretty translucent at the top. But the plaster is really starting to kind of like completely settle in. And so you can think of this as right now at a phase when it's you can call this a false island. I like to call this a false island. Essentially, you want to keep adding pottery plaster into the water until an island stays there. And you'll also notice that if I had added it all in one central location with this small amount of water, an island would have kind of been almost forced to be there. But by spreading it evenly, and I'll kind of do it over in this one, kind of a mock, by spreading it evenly in the container, what happens is that it gives it a chance to really fully kind of like, because plaster is a chemical process. So what'll happen is that it's giving it time to really fully saturate the water as it needs to be. So the lovely Siskiyou Boulevard and Route 66 intersect right outside of our classroom here. And so that's a lot of the traffic noise you hear. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit more. So now it's all basically saturated. And you can see that the dirt that's in this kind of empty bag. So people, you really have to be careful to use dry hands, and you have to use clean vessels that you're adding. So you can see I'm just kind of adding it in. You'll notice I have not at any point mixed the water. I'm just adding it. It's slaking in. So when you're first doing this, it goes kind of slow because you're getting the touch of it. But once you've made about, I would say about 5 batches like this, maybe 3 batches of this, you'll basically be able to add so that you're almost only waiting near the very, very end. So for me, it's like I'm chomping at the bit to add more. But really, you can just keep kind of adding. You don't have to wait so much between these. So I'm just kind of slaking it in and slaking it in and letting it slake in. I'll get a little bit more out of here. I'll try to find a little off the side so I get a little cleaner. And now we're getting kind of close to the end. That felt like it sounded like Bob Ross. So I'm just kind of slaking it in now. Now that I'm getting this, and normally if I wasn't doing this for camera, I would continue to pour, but I think it might be easier to see in these multiple angles if I just tell you this. It's a little messier on the table. But okay, so you're starting to see a few real islands. So there's our first kind of real island. You can see it disappears. So you can start to see, so those islands are staying. But see how the white tip melts, basically, it gets wet? So we're almost there. We are almost there. So it's still fully getting wet pretty quick. So now let's see. So the island is starting to say it's wet, but it's staying above the surface. It's staying above the surface. So this is kind of right here. I'm going to go ahead and call it that is a stopping point of adding plaster. And so I'm hoping that you can see, and I'm just going to make it a little more just so you can see a little dramaticness of how this works. And hopefully, maybe Chilla, I'm curious, can you zoom in on that camera at all? One more zoom or there. It might be really pixelated at this point, but you can see that it's wet. So the dry plaster has absorbed moisture at the very top, but we are there. We are there. So I'm just going to take my hand and pass it over a trash can. And I'm going to take my clean hand, and I'm now going to. So what I've done is when you're doing a quick adding. So this was extremely slow. You want to let it sit for about 1 minute. So it's been about 20 seconds, and we'll give it another 10 seconds. But it's really for this small amount, and when I went so slow, it'll be perfectly fine for right now. So I brush off this kind of extra bit. I let that little bit slake in, because if I start mixing it before, it's going to become really lumpy. By letting it sit, it's going to make my mixing super clean and easy. Okay, so now I just take it and I just mix it. And I can feel and hear that I missed a lot of chunks, a lot of small chunks. For the purpose of this demo, we're just doing a small, solid casting. We're just going to cast, actually, maybe Chilla, if you could, I'm going to switch over with Chilla here. Chilla, why don't you come switch with me, and you can just kind of describe what you made and how you made it. And we're just going to let this kind of settle for a second.
Okay, so this is what we're going to be using to make kind of a rough little mold today. Basically, this is just a lump of clay, just recycled clay from the ceramics yard. And I was kind of curious to see what it would look like if I just kind of like I was trying to make some sort of vessel, but I wanted the interior to be kind of interesting. So it's basically just my fingers kind of pressed into this like lump of clay. So you've got like the imprint of them, and then the outside, all the cracks are sealed up so it can contain the moisture that's going to be poured into it. And so yeah, we'll just pour the plaster in there.
Okay, perfect. gonna set that down. So what I'll do is I'll kind of give it a little bit of a tap so it doesn't tip over. And then what I'm gonna do with this is I'm actually gonna tap this, and you're gonna see a few air bubbles come to the surface. When you're mixing a larger batch, you'll really see air bubbles really come. You're starting to see a few air bubbles kind of pop. It might just be hard to see on the video. Okay, so because we did it so slow, it's a super thick batch. So this is really not the best example. And I'm going to tell you, we actually used hot water to cheat so that it would set up faster. So then I'm just going to clean this up, but I never want you to use hot water until you've made like 50 of these. Okay, so we're going to take that one there. And then Chella's actually made a second kind of version of a fist, hand, fingers. And we're going to stick that in. And it's really thickening up. So when it starts to thicken like this, you know, we're going to actually do this as a second. And what we're going to do is we're going to come over here and we're going to do a kind of a construction. So this is bubble wrap. Maybe, yeah, zoom out on that. So this is a piece of bubble wrap with a couple strings. What we're going to do is we're just going to push this on here. So if you put plaster that's too thick in a mold, it's not going to be a liquid, and it's not going to fill in and do everything. We're going to do a second plaster tutorial where I'm not going to kind of go quite so slow. By going so slow for such a small amount and using hot water, it firmed up just really fast. And so, but what this is going to show you is this is going to show you in about 45 minutes, we'll get a positive of the kind of quick and dirty hand mold in clay. And what I'm doing is, I don't know if you can see it in the video, but I have these strings from a piece of burlap, and I'm just embedding some of those with the bubble wrap. And I'll just take one more piece right here, just kind of show you how I can, because I'm right at the end of being able to work this material. But I have just another moment, 30 seconds or so, while I can move it in. And it's starting to get hard, but by kind of jiggling it, it gives me a little extra working time. You can call this the work time, as kind of the pot light, POT, before it really firms up. That's how long something is chemical. So now at this point, I have plaster on my fingers that's starting to have a chemical reaction. It's really firming up. It's really starting to firm up. So it's easiest to get off my fingers as soon as possible. So I'm gonna rinse my hands and my tool in this bucket over here. I'm gonna bring it to the camera so you can see. And I'll just kind of shift this over just a little bit so you can get a sense of this. So what you want to do when you do this is you want to just if you wait too long, it's a real pain in the ass. Pain in the derriere to get it off. So you want to get it out of your fingernails. And if you don't do this, it just really adds time. And so all of you during COVID, you're going to have your own kind of rinse bucket that you're going to be using if you're using plaster, that you'll use. And if you're doing a plaster project, you'll use that for the whole project, and you'll be sure to disinfect it properly after. We do not have enough yogurt containers for everyone. We have some extras, but if you have some, please bring them in. Please save them. And so now we are basically cleaned up. And so I think that's going to complete our first plaster demo. Super clean, super easy. Not exactly intuitive, but at the same time, once you get started and going, it gets real intuitive real fast. Okay, thank you so much. And I can't touch my computer until my hands are dry. Okay, this is a slow end.